It's been really interesting how many of you have come up to me and expressed your enthusiasm for this talk. This is something that we didn't really have planned when Gabe was in charge of the speakers, and we didn't really have this planned. We shoehorned this in. This is a talk that Kate and I were asked to do at the Bloomfield, Iowa Grazing Conference in January, and it was so well received that we decided that a lot of you might enjoy hearing it. So it's a little different than the rest of our topics here. We're going to talk a little bit about what our family has learned about how diet impacts our health. And before we can do that, we need to talk about what health is. And I used to think being healthy meant scheduling a regular, going seeing the doctor and the dentist once every year or two. But what is health? Is it the absence of the symptom? Is it the absence of symptoms of sickness? Is it when you feel good? Is it having energy? Is it a physical thing, an emotional thing, spiritual? It's very hard. We can't really figure out what health is until we can't really talk about what we need to do to be healthy until we know what it is, what's our goal, what is it we're trying to accomplish here. In our culture, there's very few people that understand health. There's a lot of people that focus on sickness. So when you go to a doctor, you're going to a specialist in sickness. When you go to a hospital, you're going to a place that specializes in sickness. But it's very hard to find somebody that specializes in what wellness or health actually looks like. What does vitality look like? What does life force look like? To me, my definition of health is very simple. It's resiliency. We live in a toxic world, as we just got done hearing about. That isn't going to change. There is nowhere on earth you can go and live that there isn't Roundup in the air and in the water. Nowhere. Trying to create a bubble for ourselves where we don't have any toxins around us or in us isn't going to be possible. There's no way I can raise my children completely free of contaminants or toxins or pesticides or chemicals. That's just not possible at this point. So what I want for myself and my family is I want resiliency. I want to be resilient enough and have enough life force, enough vitality that that my body and my mind and my emotions can handle a certain amount of toxicity. The definition in the dictionary of resiliency is the second definition is the ability to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like. And it's interesting, that's actually what I was getting at yesterday when I asked the panel the first question. Because what they all had in common was resiliency. They were able to recover from adversity. And our family is really the same way. We've been challenged by some adversities, and we've learned how to develop our own sense of resiliency. All right? We can't really have a conversation about health until we talk a little bit about what we value, because if I asked you if you value your health, everybody's going to raise your hand, right? Who does not value their health out here? Anybody? All right, if everyone says they value their health. But it's not what you say that matters, it's what you do. And my experience is what we really value is self-indulgence. We come out of the womb with a desire to do what we want to do and not have anybody tell us any differently. It takes an active application of energy to do anything other than live in self-indulgence. And so our core value, our default value, unless we apply energy and work towards having a higher value system, is self-indulgence. And food allergies are intimidating to us. The idea that there's foods that we just can't eat are intimidating to us because at the core level, at the heart level, we don't want to have to give up something that we think we need or that we think we like. I like living with the self-indulgence of being able to eat anything I want to eat. And I don't want to think about food allergies because that means I might have to give up something or live without something that I like to indulge in. All right, another question we have to answer. What is aging? How do you know somebody's old? I heard something recently from that I really liked. Age is simply stiffness. Age is stiffness. Think about that for a minute. Age is stiffness. It's stiffness physically. If you see somebody a quarter mile away walking across a parking lot, you can't make out their facial features, but you can get within 5 years of their age. Why? Because you can see from that distance the level of stiffness they carry in their body. You can see their posture. You can see how difficult it is for them to move. And you can get you can make a pretty good judgment of their age. Age is stiffness, but it's not just physical. Can we be stiff mentally? Can you be stiff emotionally? Can you be stiff spiritually? Can you be stiff socially? Age is just stiffness. And youth, by definition then, is flexibility. Youth is resiliency, being flexible enough to recover quickly from adversity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my family. These are my 6 living children. Kate is the oldest, who you'll hear from in a minute. She's 13. Will is 12. Siri in the back is 8. Gracie is 7. And then I have 2 twins, Emily in the pink and Hannah in the black, that although they don't look like twins, they have absolutely nothing in common with other than their birth date. Personality, everything about them is different. Our journey to health. Dee and I grew up in a time when food doesn't matter was our culture. That's what we were taught as kids, is that food's abundant. Why would you waste time growing a garden when you can just go to the store and buy it? Why would you go to the trouble of making bread from scratch when you can go buy a loaf at the grocery store? Breastfeeding babies is way too much work and trouble when you can give them formula. Convenience trumps quality or healthfulness. Nobody really even thought about those things. Over time, as we got married, and we carried our dietary habits from childhood into our marriage, and after Kate was our firstborn, and after she was maybe 3 years old, we were forced to deal with adversity. We have a really sick child, and nobody can tell us what's wrong with her. Obviously, her digestion doesn't work. She doesn't gain any weight. She has either bloating and gas or constant diarrhea. Nobody can tell us what's wrong with her. It's not an infection. That's a relatively significant adversity. And honestly, from my perspective, Kate's one of my heroes, because Kate has learned to live with adversity all of her life, and she has been forced to give up her base value of self-indulgence and replace it with self-discipline. She's very well acquainted with what happens when she eats something that her body can't digest. That's a level of adversity that I've never had to deal with. That's a level of self-discipline that I've never been asked to put myself through. Day by day, meal by meal, being extremely careful about what she eats. And I know from the conversations I've had with some of you that many of you are facing that. You're coming to an awareness that you're going to need, that in order for you to be healthy, that's going to require you to give up self-indulgence and to really master the art of disciplining yourself. And that's frightening. That's something we don't do unless we're pushed, unless we're forced to. So it was intimidating for Dee and I. We didn't know how. We're both really busy. We don't have time to figure out how to make all of our food from scratch. How do you feed a family without the processed foods that we'd grown up on? Breakfast is pasteurized milk and cereal out of a box. What do you do for breakfast if that's not what you eat? What do you do if you can't just go and buy food at the grocery store that will feed and nourish your children? The idea that my children can't be nourished on the same food that I can live on apparently just fine is incredibly intimidating. So the first thing we did, which is the first thing everybody does, is you substitute one highly processed food for another one that just doesn't have the food in it that makes you sick. So if you're celiac, if you have a gluten intolerance, you can buy highly processed foods that don't have any gluten in them. They have tapioca flour, they have coconut flour, they have potato starch, they have corn starch, but they don't have gluten. And so they'll kill you more slowly than the gluten would have. And you know, you got to give yourself permission to be where you are. That was as good as we could do at first. This eliminated the worst of Kate's symptoms, but we weren't really healthy. We started then, the point I want to make here is that this is a journey. I'm not an expert. Kate's actually much more of an expert than I am about this, and you'll get to hear from her in a minute. But this is a journey that all of us are on to understand, how can I be more resilient? I'm going to go through a life where there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of adversity. There's physical, emotional, mental stress, and I want to make myself as resilient as possible for that. And what we learned is that it's all about our gut health. It's all about microbiology. We've talked, virtually all the speakers have talked about how everything starts in the soil, and having the balance of bacteria and fungi in the soil is so critically important, and that ultimately dictates what you can grow in that soil. And what we've learned about gut health is it's the same thing. What's in our gut will determine our ability to be resilient, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Our next major challenge was, other than having foreign diapers at one time, which was a certain amount of adversity, was Emily. When we found out we were having twins, my wife did some research. She did a lot of research, and she found a book written by the multiples neonatal care unit at Johns Hopkins University, and her advice was really simple. If you want to have healthy multiple children, twins, triplets, whatever, it's very simple. The higher the birth weight and the closer to full term those babies are when they're born, the less problems they're going to have throughout their life. And the only way you can have multiples that are full term babies and that are normal birth weight is you have to eat constantly. You have to wake up in the middle of the night and go eat a pint of ice cream. You just have to consume an enormous number of calories. And so Dee did that. She ate when she didn't feel like eating. I made her a steak every night. She had a steak every morning for breakfast. She ate ice cream, she ate butter. And she delivered full-term 7.5-pound twins. And you know, that was her. She knew that the one thing she could do to give those children a great start in life was to properly nourish them in utero. And she made a commitment to sacrifice to do that. One of those twins was Emily. In spite of all that, in spite of the fact they were full term and they were normal birth weight babies, Emily had a tremendous physical allergy to virtually everything that Dee was eating. Any kind of grain, even rice, any kind of gluten-free processed grain product, any kind of bread, chocolate, fruit, caffeine, any dairy of any kind, even raw milk, even raw milk that we made into yogurt at home, nothing worked for Emily. And there's nothing like a screaming baby that forces you to eliminate the foods out of your diet that you don't have the self-discipline to do. And when baby ain't happy, mama ain't happy, and when mama ain't happy, nobody's happy at home. And so Emily was our second opportunity to be pushed into learning more about what we really shouldn't be eating. So we all jumped off the deep end and we eliminated all those foods from our diet, which is basically anything that comes with a UPC code. We were down to meat, basically no fruit, meat, vegetables, and water and tea. That was basically our diet. And Emily started sleeping. And so we started sleeping. And Dee noticed after a couple months how much better she felt with all those things eliminated from her diet. And even though Emily's been long weaned at this point, Dee has never added any of those things back into her diet again. Now, she would have never, ever had the self-discipline necessary to do that if she wasn't facing the extreme adversity of having a baby that cries inconsolably and never ever sleeps. So, getting back to the question I asked the panel yesterday, is adversity really a problem or is it a blessing? guess it depends on how you respond to it. About the same time, we discovered, in our opinion, the most incredible nutritional information available today is being done by the Weston A. Price Foundation. And I have a whole other presentation about the work that they do, but if you're not familiar with them, how many of you have heard of the Weston A. Price organization? All right, terrific. Their quarterly magazine is, in my opinion, the very best summary of the research that's being done on nutrition all over the world. It's excellent information. How many have heard of Francis Pottinger? All right, those of you that haven't, you need to read his book called Pottinger's Cats. And then there's a new book that's been written about how his work is an explanation for what we're seeing in terms of chronic disease in modern times by Greg Graham, Pottinger's Prophecy. A real short point I want to make about Pottinger's cats, one of the things he found is on a devitalized diet, by the 4th generation, all of his cats were sterile. How many of you have read the reports in the last 6 months about how the rate of teenage pregnancies in the United States is dropping dramatically? Have any of you seen that? And the conclusion is that, wow, teenagers just aren't having sex anymore. How many of you actually buy that? I find that one really hard to believe. The truth might be a lot more frightening. What if 16 to 19-year-old females are already infertile? What if we're past the tipping point because of GMOs and because of the devitalized food that we're providing? What if all those teenage girls, when they actually want to have babies in 10 years, are going to find out they can't? Something to think about. The work through our research with Weston A. Price Organization, we came across a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. And this became our food Bible. This is what has worked better than anything else for our family to give us an understanding of how virtually all of the modern psychological things we're dealing with, autism, celiac, are all stemming from a abnormal gut flora. If you haven't gotten that, I can't recommend this highly enough. This is a book you absolutely need to read. It's called Gut and Psychology Syndrome. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride is she's a physician who practices in the UK and has done excellent work on, these things are complicated. They're caused by a lot of different things, but the way you deal with them is by radically changing the flora in your gut. So here are some of the first steps we took. We got rid of our microwave. We stopped drinking any sort of pop or soda. We switched from processed gluten-containing wheat breads to processed gluten-free breads and crackers, and that's a good first step. We stopped drinking juice completely. We started drinking water and tea. We stopped drinking pus-filled, pasteurized conventional milk, filled with what used to be Monsanto's bovine growth hormone. I've significantly increased my attention to this since I've started getting to know Dr. Huber, but we've eliminated GMOs from our diet. All right, the GAPS diet is pretty straightforward. It's focused on optimizing gut health and beneficial gut bacteria. And it's based on an elimination diet. What you have to do, if you've been living on a lot of processed carbohydrates and sugars, the majority of the gut flora you have are the harmful or at least non-beneficial species of yeast and bacteria and fungi that live on carbohydrates. And you have to kill them. And they don't go easily. They want to stay, and they have a lot of power over all of us. They're far more addictive. Their waste product is far more addictive than heroin is. It's far harder to get off of sugar than it is to get off of opiates. So we know what we don't want. What we don't want is processed carbohydrates. What we do want is nourishing fats. And Paul, where's Paul? Because I got to tell you, you just don't understand the value of those laying hens. The most valuable product you have on your farm is those spent laying hens. By far the most valuable. Any customer that you have that reads this book will pay $10 a bird for those. More than enough to cover your cost of making them. The most valuable chicken that we have is a 3 or 4 year old spent hen. You know how many of you butchered one of those? And the whole inside is covered with this bright yellow globby fat. That is the foundation for the GAPS diet, and that's the foundation for good gut health. Learning how to make chicken broth out of those kind of hens, you can't do this with grocery store hens. They've got to be pastured hens where when you open them up, they've got this really, it looks like butter, and it's just all over the inside of them. And you put that whole hen in the stew pot and stew it for 24 or 48 hours and strain everything out. And the broth that you have is the most nourishing, most deeply nourishing food that I know of, bar none. That's what you need to base your diet on. And the GAPS elimination diet is pretty simple. You go to 3 days of just that broth. Broth for breakfast, broth for lunch, broth for supper, and you will feel like crap. Because what's happening is you are killing off all the bacteria that live in your gut, except for the ones that are nourished by that broth. And you'll feel like you have the flu. And literally you'll feel miserable. You'll be sure that you have food poisoning. But what's happening is that those bacteria are dying off. And when they all die at once, there's a lot of toxins that your body has to get rid of and has to process through. But if you get through that, and you start adding some food back to it, you will find that will radically change your health. Then after that, you add back one at a time a little bit of cooked. Believe me, you can't imagine how great some cooked carrots are until you've lived on chicken broth for 3 days. Cooked broccoli, a little, any kind of. If you have kids that won't eat vegetables after 3 days with nothing but chicken broth, they are really looking forward to the day that you add some veggies back into the broth again. After that, we add back grass-fed meats and liver, and then once we're sure that we're fully digesting all those things, then we're going to add back in grass-fed yogurt, sour cream, kefir, the fermented products, and then ultimately whole raw milk again. All right. What you want to do is take your time with this so that you're able to identify only adding one food at a time in, so that you can identify which foods you simply don't have the capacity to digest. Potatoes, some rice, sourdough, some nuts. And one of the important things to understand is that it's always a bad idea to follow somebody else's diet plan, because every one of you is totally unique. What I function optimally on is very different than what Kate does. If I tried to follow Kate's diet, I would have no energy. I need more carbohydrates than she does. And I can have gluten as long as it's been pre-fermented. It either has to be sprouted or it has to be fermented and made into sourdough. But I feel best if I have a couple pieces of sourdough bread every day. And I could say that because this works for me, this is the diet that all of you should follow, and that's totally crazy. What you need to do is to develop resilience is to develop, once you go through an elimination diet like this, you will restore your body's ability to tell you what it likes. All of us, we come pre-wired with that, the ability to just know this food makes me feel terrible, this food makes me feel vitalized. But we lose that when we eat a diet that's high in processed carbohydrates, because our gut is so intelligent, it will tell us what it wants, but only if it's not been overwhelmed and overloaded by a lot of processed carbs. All right, here's our typical menu at home. Per person, we're eating 2 to 8 eggs, oftentimes with ground beef or ham with it. We typically have some sauteed kale with that. Cultured vegetables are an incredible source of lactobacillus and other beneficial bacteria. So traditionally made sauerkraut, not something that comes out of a jar. If it has a UPC code on it, it isn't going to have any beneficial bacteria because it will have been pasteurized. But homemade sauerkraut, and you can go online and research. Sander Katz is the Katz, has written a couple of great books about fermentation, how to do a home fermentation. Raw whole milk, plain yogurt. We don't have any fruit at breakfast, hardly at all. We don't have any cereal ever. One day a week, we now are, after doing this elimination diet for quite a while, we now have oatmeal one day a week, and I make French toast for everybody one day a week using gluten-free bread. But it's taken us a couple of years to get to the point where we felt like we wanted to add that back in. Every time we tried to add it back in prior to that, we saw the resiliency of all of us drop. Snacks, I'm not going to read all this because we're going to run out of time, but lunch, we eat a lot of meat and a lot of fat. But beef is not the foundation of our diet. Chicken broth is. And the moment that Dee or I notice that our kids are starting to get sick or we're feeling a little bit run down, we go right back to a couple of days with a broth-based soup as the foundation of our lunch and dinner. And we always have broth in the refrigerator to make soup with. So Kate's lunch today was some chicken soup that she brought with and heated up in a crock pot. And then we're a big fan. We eat as a family, the 8 of us eat over a pound of grass-fed butter every day. The butter we happen to like right now is Kerrygold butter from Ireland. That's 100% grass-fed. It's widely available at every Costco. Most higher-end grocery stores in the country carry it. And we think butter's a health food because it's the fats that I need to really nourish and heal my gut. All right, so what's the goal? The goal is not to make my life miserable by eliminating any sort of enjoyment that I once used to get from eating. That's what it looks like. I mean, I know for most of you look at this diet and you think, I might as well just slit my wrist now because that looks like a pretty unpleasant existence. And all that means is that you haven't encountered enough health problems yet to force you to do that. But you will. At some point, you'll age enough, you'll lose the flexibility necessary to digest a highly processed diet. And inevitably, there will come a day for just about all of you, except for those of you that were raised on this kind of diet in the first 10 years of your life, you may be able to survive the next 90 years on a processed diet. But most of us in this room weren't raised on this diet the first 10 years of our life. And for us, as we age, we hit a point at which we have to start exercising some self-discipline and choosing to limit our food options in order to maintain our resiliency. My goal is to move from stiffness to flexibility in my mind, my emotions, physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. And the more I focus on that, I feel like I'm actually getting younger. So here's some of the lessons that we learned. One is start by asking for wisdom. And then you have to, the problem with praying is that you sort of have to be open to it when it shows up. And when it shows up, it hardly ever looks like what you think it's going to look like. So at some point, if I asked for health, and I got Kate, and I got Emily. Now, at the time at which we were frustrated because Kate was so sick and we didn't know that, does that look like an answer to prayer? Does having a baby that won't sleep because she's having a food reaction to everything you eat, is that an answer to prayer? Well, it is, but it's really hard to see that at the time. It's really easy for us in our stiffness to ask for help, and then when it shows up to say, no, I'm not open-minded enough, I'm not flexibly minded enough to look at that as the answer, but it is. So we've opened ourselves up to all kinds of different types of restoration: homeopathy, bodywork, chiropractic, massage, rolfing, a lot of detoxification. The building that the picture of my kids that they were sitting on is our wood-fired sauna that's in our backyard. And in the wintertime, we sauna at least once a week in order to detoxify. Remember, the point isn't to eat what I eat or to eat what Kate eats. It's to free your body up from the toxins that have accumulated from the processed food so that your body can tell you what's right for you. All right, now I'm going to let Kate talk for a few minutes here and share. Yeah, sorry, Kate. There's not a lot of time left. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
My name is Kate Churchill, and I'm 13 years old. Most of you already know me as a top ticket taker. And I was diagnosed with celiac disease when I was 5. And
You're good.
Okay. And celiac disease is a disease that some people have it and they don't even know it. When you eat wheat or gluten, the villi in the intestines, the wheat molecules and gluten molecules, they flatten them out and stick them together, which eventually makes the body not able to digest anything at all. So we knew that we had to find a cure for this. And so I was diagnosed, and then that fixed a lot of my problems. I moved through 2 sizes in 6 months. I just grew and grew. I was happy, I had energy, I felt like everything was fixed. And then when I was 8, we discovered that I was allergic to all kinds of corn and any artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives. And that was an even bigger blow to my parents, because what in the world was I going to eat then? We rediscovered a lot of foods. I eat a huge amount of fruits and veggies. Whatever is seasonal, I really like berries. We have laying hens, and it's really interesting to see their eggs. They lay. We let them free range every day, and the yolks from their eggs are bright orange. They're glowing orange, and if you take an egg from the store that's been laid by a confinement hen, the yolk will be a pale yellow. And if you crack them in the same dish, it's really interesting to see the contrast. I eat a lot of bad beef, and that works really well for me. Even now, I cannot eat meat made from a different company because I'm still reacting to what the cattle ate. I can't eat confined beef, not at all. We do buy some gluten-free bread. We found 1 or 2 brands that work really well for us. And I also do a lot of baking. I use coconut flour, and the picture of the book is Cooking with Coconut Flour by Bruce Pike. That's the one I use, and then I buy the coconut flour bulk from Wilderness Family Naturals. It's based in northern Minnesota. And coconut flour is very dense, so it makes things a lot heavier. So generally you need to use a lot more milk and eggs in it to even it out, which is why it generally seems to taste best in muffins and heavier cakes. It's not puffy, but I can make a mean chocolate cake. There are just so many other things to eat. There's a lot of different foods to eat. And now I think we're going to do a bit of a question and answer section. Dad is going to pretend to interview me, and feel free to ask your own questions during this time if you want to.
So how do you travel? I mean, how do you ever leave home and find anything to eat?
Well, first few months of this diet, I was pretty much stuck at home because it feels like you need stove to make pretty much everything. Chicken broth is not good cold, trust me. One thing that I found is that is a real lifesaver for me is a tiny miniature crock pot that plugs in, and it's got a little carry handle on it. It's got an inside washable container that can be taken out and put back in. You can eat leftover, whatever you want, leftover stir fry, soup, broth, vegetables, whatever you want, and that's what I use to reheat my chicken soup that I brought with me and had for lunch earlier. So that is a big thing for me. We bring gluten-free bread along. We almost always have a fridge in our room. If we're going to be traveling a lot, moving from place to place, then we always do bring a cooler with us. We bring butter, yogurt, raw milk. We have one brand of lunch meat that works really well for us. We can do that. We bring snack sticks. We bring a lot of different foods.
Hard-boiled eggs.
Hard-boiled eggs and all kinds of stuff.
How do you What happens to your body if you eat something that you can't digest?
It
How-
depends on what the food is. My reaction is very from mild to extreme.
And how long does it take for you to know that you ate something that had wheat or corn in it?
About half an hour. And within the next hour, I am going to be throwing up and throwing away. Unfortunately, some people react very mildly to things. They might get a small rash and just a small stomachache, but I react horribly to it. And at this point, for me, being sick that badly, that long, it's just not worth having any regret. It's not worth it. But if it's more mild, for example, I don't react as badly to confinement fed beef. Instead, I'll probably feel lethargic and just have a stomachache for the next few days. So if I get sick like that, generally I go on chicken soup and kind of go back to a general gas diet to heal my stomach and then slowly add things back in from there.
So what's your favorite thing to eat?
Well, that's hard. I really like Mom's chicken soup. All fresh fruits, all fresh veggies. I love butter. Steak. I love steak. And some baked vegetables. I like pretty much anything. The only thing I don't eat is fish.
That's true. You're not big on fish. You won't eat my sushi with you.
No, I won't.
So if your best friend was just diagnosed with food allergies or celiac, and she was really upset because she didn't know what she was possibly going to eat, what would you tell her?
I would. Well, the first thing I would do is often go shopping with her. There's a lot of other food out there. There's fresh fruits and veggies. She's gonna feel really bad at first. For the first few days, when she starts going through a lot of time goes through the gas diet, and then as she starts going through that, she's gonna feel really bad. And I think that's why it's good to have friends, because they can support you through stuff like that, friends and family. And so I would keep supporting her, and then encourage her to add things back in.
Mm-hmm. When you eat a processed diet, real food, nourishing food doesn't taste good. And that's all come back. So we're happy to answer some more questions. If you have any, come up and visit with us.